Alright, it's no secret that I've owned the Fujifilm XT5 for the last 3 months, and if you are a long-term viewer of the channel, you'll know that I previously was shooting on the full-frame Sony a7 IV. I've traveled a lot with this beautiful little camera to Korea, around the coast of Australia, and a recent trip to Bali, Indonesia. During this time, I've taken over 16,000 raw images, and a lot of these edited images have been added into my portfolio. I'm definitely a fan, and in today's video, I want to talk about the things that I love, the things that I dislike, along with the challenges that I've overcome, and then finish on examining the actual difference in image quality between my full frame Sony a7 IV and the XT5's digital files, as well as the difference in a large print. So we have a lot to unpack, and let's just jump right in. Also, today's video is based on my actual user experience of the camera rather than just reading the specs that are on the brochure. So let's start with the things that I like. Let's start with the things that I love about the Fujifilm XT5. Firstly, I love that the XT5 is a photography first camera, which is rare in the world of this hybrid nature. This is because of things like the 40 megapixel sensor, the tilting screen rather than the flip out screen, the dials, and the overall ergonomics is designed around photography. The build, the size, and the weight is just perfect for travel, especially when paired with lenses like the Fujifilm 18mm f2 or my personal favorite, the 27mm f2.8. The grip and the overall ergonomics of the camera is just fantastic. Having larger lenses attached like this Viltrox 75mm f1.2 for an example just feels fantastic on this small body. Now, this lens did just arrive in the mail today, and I'll be testing it out over the next couple of weeks in Europe. The menu, while being confusing, you actually get a lot of customization, especially for video. And just simple things like changing the dial controls and also the dial direction, which is something that you can't do with other camera brands. From the user experience of the Fujifilm XT5, this camera has honestly made me a better photographer. And I don't want or like to say that a camera will make you a better photographer, but there's definitely merit in owning a camera that inspires you to go out and shoot more, along with the overall aesthetic of the camera, which not only just looks fantastic, it's also extremely fun to use. Now, even though I don't use or store the JPEG film simulations, it's very inspiring for myself to see what the edited photo may look like while I'm looking through the live view via the screen or the viewfinder. I'm still using the APSC film simulation, which is very similar to my new V3 Lightroom film preset pack. I did release this pack about 2 weeks ago, and I've had some fantastic positive feedback. So I'd like to thank you and for supporting the channel. If you haven't picked up this preset pack, they are linked in the description down below. And on the topic of editing, this brings me on to my next point that's extremely important to myself, and that's that the raw files just edit great. You get a very similar look to the full frame resolution and dynamic range with the unique layout of that bayonet X-Trans 40 megapixel sensor along with the DR200 setting. The DR settings blends two images together at a higher and lower ISO, retaining more detail in the shadows and the highlights. And this is similar to HDR, but it doesn't give you that hideous HDR look. While editing the raw files, you'll notice that you get really nice roll off in the highlights as well as shadows to blacks. Next is battery life, and on the brochure it says you only get about 600 shots per battery. But I don't know why I get way more than this. Like, I did a video recently in Bali, a day of portrait photography, and I shot a total of 1,846 images. And I changed the battery at the end of the session, which is great as I only just own the one spare battery, and that has been perfect for me so far. The EVF is great, it's nice and bright and also quite large. And even though the specs on paper match my Sony a7 IV EVF, the XT5 just seems better, and I always get disappointed when I use the EVF of my Sony a7 IV during a wedding. The video quality is not amazing, and I'm okay with that, because like I said before, this is a photography first camera. The F-Log 2 has plenty of dynamic range, and I can push and pull my exposure and white balance while I'm grading. I only use the standard 4K 25 frames per second. Now I know that you can select different codecs with downsampling, 6K or higher frame rates, but because I don't use slow motion footage as much as I used to, and all of these other codecs all apply a pretty big crop. Now larger megapixel sensors also result in slower readout, meaning that you can get some pretty bad rolling shutter, but me personally, I haven't noticed it, and nor does it bother me. And finally, I want to finish on something that a lot of people, especially here on YouTube, just don't talk about, and that's the 3-year warranty with the 500,000 shutter rating. My main wedding photography cameras are the Sony a7 IVs, and they only have a 2-year warranty with a 200,000 shutter rating. Now that's if it even makes it to it, as I've had 2 Sony a7 IVs shutter fail well before 200,000 clicks, and Sony have a very poor pro camera support, forcing you to buy an additional camera while one is getting repaired. So 3 years with 500,000 clicks reassures me that Fujifilm is very confident in the build of their cameras. Now, there's not a lot that I dislike or feel like complaining about. The default settings out of the box are just not very good. For example, when I was in Korea and trying to film some B-roll, the aperture was always stuck at 6.4 when using the 18 to 55mm kit lens that doesn't have a physical aperturing. It took about 2 hours to find a solution online, and I had to turn off movie optimized control, and this fixed the issue. There is a few other settings that have annoyed me, to say the least, and if you want to see an XT5 photography settings video, leave a comment down below. The noise at higher ISO is something that I'm not really complaining about, but it's worth mentioning that the max ISO I have found that works the best on the XT5 is around 1250. Now I have pushed this right up to 3200 with good results, and I've noticed that the grain is a lot more pleasing compared to other cameras which have more rougher and colorful grain. APSC sensors and just higher megapixel sensors does result in more noise. But my biggest complaint is the autofocus, as I feel no image that I capture is 100% in focus, resulting in my images just not being as sharp when compared using the Sony a6700 for an example. This is mainly about the usability, which results in the reduction of accuracy, and what I mean by that is that it's just not very good and confident inspiring whether you've hit your subject you're attempting to focus on. The 3D continuous tracking feature is just not up to the standard compared to Sony, resulting in me using the single point, but even then I have found that it still focuses on the background if you just do not have a clear subject. My preference is always to use continuous autofocus, as when your camera moves or your subject moves, your subject will always stay in focus until you hit the shutter. And the best results are from when there is a clear subject with good contrast. And my suspicion was right that there's just less phase detection points on Fujifilm compared to Sony. The Sony a6700 and the a7 IV have 759 phase detection points compared to the XT5, which only has 425. So less phase detection points really makes the camera rely on contrast-based autofocus, so the XT5 doesn't have amazing autofocus, but it's not a huge problem. And just keep in mind that the autofocus really does shine when you have a clear subject, like a portrait with continuous eye tracking works pretty decent, or a subject with just good contrast to aid the camera to hit that focus mark. I'm actually personally happy with the image quality of the RAW files. They definitely edit beautifully, but I would like to mention that if you really zoom in and you pixel peep, you will notice that the XT5 is just not as sharp and detailed even compared to lower megapixel APS-C cameras like the Sony a6700. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this is because of the autofocus or the sensor. And this is the same result from all of the different lenses that I've tested over the last 3 months, whether that's from third-party glass or popular native Fuji lenses like the praised 18mm and the 33mm f1.4. This personally isn't a massive deal, but I definitely wanted to mention these findings. And over the last 6 months, I've been really enjoying printing my work into large 50x70 prints. And this week I actually printed a photo shot on the Fujifilm XT5 in this large print format with the same print size on the same paper and the same printing process shot on the SONY a7 IV with its 33 megapixel full frame sensor. And I honestly cannot tell the difference which one was shot on the APSC camera or the full frame camera. And that's the biggest difference for myself, as you're never really going to notice the image quality unless you really pixel peep and zoom into the digital image. And you're also just not going to notice it when you use a large print, which is super confident and inspiring for myself, as I do enjoy printing my work and I do want the best quality available to me. So in conclusion, today's video, I wanted to avoid repeating myself from previous videos. So if you want to see more content shot on this camera, like low light performance, what Fujifilm gear I pack for travel, the XT5 for portraits, etc., go check out my other videos on the channel. Now I'm going to be heading off to Europe for 5 weeks, and you bet I'll be packing the XT5 with a few selected lenses. And I'm shooting a few weddings, so I'll be traveling with my Sony kit as well. So make sure you subscribe for more great photography content. If you like the way that I edit my photos, go check out my Lightroom presets, and we'll see you next week in Italy. All right, bye.